When Sarah Martinez received the certified letter from her attorney confirming her will had been officially updated, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete control over her own narrative. The document in her hands represented more than legal paperwork. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful response to rejection is acceptance, and the most liberating act is making permanent what others threaten as punishment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, Sarah had built a successful career as a pediatric surgeon in Denver, Colorado. Her hands, steady enough to operate on newborn hearts, trembled slightly as she held the letter that formalized what her mother had declared 6 months earlier: she was dead to them. But unlike her mother's dramatic proclamation, Sarah's version came with legal weight, financial consequences, and the kind of finality that couldn't be undone with tearful reconciliation attempts. The scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible now but still there, served as a daily reminder of the night everything changed. Not from violence, but from the moment she realized that blood relation meant nothing when that blood carried poison instead of love. Sarah's childhood in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, looked picture-perfect from the outside. Her mother, Carmen Martinez, had immigrated from Guatemala at 19 with dreams of American prosperity and a determination that her children would achieve everything she couldn't. Her father, David, worked as a construction foreman, his hands permanently stained with concrete dust and his back bent from decades of physical labor. Carmen had built her identity around being the mother of exceptional children. Sarah's older brother, Miguel, had been the first to carry these expectations, pushed into advanced mathematics and science programs, while Carmen volunteered at every school event, making sure teachers knew she was engaged, invested, and wouldn't accept anything less than excellence from her son. When Miguel struggled with dyslexia, Carmen's response wasn't accommodation or understanding. It was increased pressure and tutoring sessions that stretched late into the night. By the time Sarah entered kindergarten, Miguel had already begun showing signs of rebellion, small acts of defiance that Carmen met with increasingly strict punishments and public embarrassment. Sarah learned early that love in the Martinez household was conditional, performance-based, and could be withdrawn without warning. Carmen found her perfect vessel in Sarah. Where Miguel struggled with reading, Sarah devoured books. Where Miguel fidgeted during piano lessons, Sarah practiced scales until her fingers moved like water over keys. Where Miguel's grades fluctuated, Sarah maintained straight A's through sheer force of will and an understanding that anything less meant disappointment that felt like abandonment. David worked long hours and weekends, leaving the child-rearing primarily to Carmen. When he was home, he was tired, stressed about money, and increasingly dependent on beer to unwind. Sarah learned to read his moods, approaching him for homework help or father-daughter moments only when he seemed relaxed, never when his shoulders carried the weight of financial worry or workplace frustration. Carmen's expectations extended beyond academics into every aspect of Sarah's presentation to the world. Her clothes had to be pristine, her hair perfectly styled, her manners impeccable. Sarah represented the family's success, proof that Carmen was raising children who would exceed their circumstances and validate her sacrifice in coming to America. The pressure manifested in small ways that accumulated over time. Carmen would inspect Sarah's homework before school, redoing any problems that weren't neat enough. She scheduled Sarah's social activities, choosing friends whose parents had respectable jobs and stable families. Sarah's interests were guided toward activities that reflected well on the family: piano recitals where Carmen could beam in the audience, honor roll ceremonies where Carmen's pride was visible to other parents, academic competitions that generated certificates for Carmen to display on the refrigerator. Miguel's rebellion intensified as he entered high school. He began skipping classes, hanging out with what Carmen called the wrong crowd, and pushing back against the academic pressure with increasingly dramatic failures. The more Miguel pulled away from Carmen's vision, the more intensely she focused on Sarah as the child who would fulfill her dreams. Sarah internalized the message that her worth was tied directly to her achievements and her ability to make Carmen proud. A B on a test wasn't just a grade, it was evidence of laziness, lack of commitment, or insufficient appreciation for the opportunities Carmen had provided. Sarah learned to anticipate Carmen's reactions and adjust her behavior accordingly, becoming hypervigilant about performance in all areas of life. The dynamic created a strange form of intimacy between Sarah and Carmen. Carmen would confide in Sarah about Miguel's disappointing choices, about David's increasing drinking, about financial struggles that kept her awake at night. Sarah became her confidant and co-conspirator, the good daughter who understood the family's challenges and worked to be part of the solution rather than adding to the problems. This pseudo-adult relationship felt special to young Sarah. She was trusted with grown-up concerns, treated as more mature than her peers, given responsibility that felt like respect. Carmen would say things like, "Sarah understands what's important," and "I can always count on Sarah," in front of other family members, creating a sense of specialness that became addictive. Sarah's social development suffered under this arrangement. While her peers were learning to navigate typical teenage relationships and conflicts, Sarah was managing her mother's emotions and maintaining the family's public image. She learned to be charming, responsible, and helpful, qualities that teachers and other adults appreciated, but that created distance from her age-appropriate friendships. The few times Sarah tried to assert independence or express preferences that differed from Carmen's vision, the response was swift and effective. Carmen would become hurt, disappointed, sometimes tearful about how Sarah was pulling away, just like Miguel. The emotional manipulation was subtle but powerful. Sarah learned that her autonomy caused her mother pain, and her compliance brought warmth and approval. High school intensified these patterns. Sarah maintained her perfect grades while participating in debate team, student council, and volunteer work at the local hospital. Each achievement felt both satisfying and hollow. She was proud of her capabilities, but increasingly aware that she was performing rather than living authentically. Carmen began planning Sarah's future with the same intensity she'd applied to her childhood achievements. Medical school was presented not as an option, but as the logical next step for someone with Sarah's intelligence and family background. Carmen spoke of Dr. Sarah Martinez as if it was already a reality, describing the pride she'd feel at graduation, the respect the family would earn, the financial security Sarah's career would provide. Miguel's trajectory served as a constant cautionary tale. By his senior year, he was barely graduating, had been arrested twice for minor offenses, and spent most of his time away from home. Carmen spoke about him with a mixture of disappointment and bewilderment, as if his choices were a personal betrayal of her sacrifice and dreams. Sarah felt the weight of being the family's remaining hope. Miguel's failures made her successes more crucial, his rebellion making her compliance more valuable. She couldn't disappoint Carmen the way Miguel had. The family's emotional and financial future seemed to rest on her shoulders. The college application process became a joint project between Sarah and Carmen. They researched pre-med programs, wrote essays that emphasized Sarah's commitment to serving underserved communities, and carefully crafted an application package that told the story Carmen wanted to tell about their family. Sarah's acceptance to the University of Colorado with a partial scholarship felt like validation of years of careful planning and sacrifice.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The night before Sarah left for college, Carmen gave her a speech about representing the family, making them proud, and remembering where she came from. Miguel, who had moved out after high school and was working construction jobs like their father, made a rare appearance for dinner. His relationship with Carmen remained strained, their interactions polite but distant. Sarah felt the complex emotions of leaving home: excitement about independence, anxiety about living up to expectations, and guilt about leaving her parents to manage without her mediating presence. Carmen cried as they loaded Sarah's belongings into David's pickup truck, talking about how empty the house would feel and how proud she was of her daughter's achievements. College represented Sarah's first taste of life beyond Carmen's direct supervision. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time, she could choose her own schedule, her own friends, her own priorities without immediate accountability to Carmen's expectations. But years of conditioning made independence feel dangerous. Without external validation and guidance, Sarah struggled to trust her own judgment. She threw herself into pre-med requirements with the same intensity she'd applied to high school academics. Organic chemistry, physics, biology, and mathematics consumed her time while she maintained the volunteer work and extracurricular activities necessary for medical school applications. Her grades remained excellent, but the cost was social isolation and increasing anxiety about performance. Carmen called twice weekly for detailed updates on Sarah's progress. These conversations followed predictable patterns. Carmen would ask about grades, professors, and future plans while sharing updates about family finances, David's work situation, and Miguel's continued struggles. Sarah learned to present information in ways that maintained Carmen's pride while avoiding topics that might cause worry or disappointment. During winter break of Sarah's sophomore year, the family dynamics had shifted noticeably. David's drinking had increased, though it remained functional. He still worked consistently and paid bills, but his evening beer consumption had expanded into a more serious dependency. Carmen seemed more anxious, more focused on Sarah's success as validation of her choices and sacrifice. Miguel had been arrested again, this time for driving under the influence. The incident required Carmen to hire a lawyer, depleting the family's emergency savings and adding financial stress to an already tight budget. Carmen spoke about Miguel with a mixture of anger and resignation, as if she'd finally accepted that her eldest child would never fulfill her dreams. The contrast between Miguel's failures and Sarah's achievements became more pronounced. Carmen would mention Sarah's accomplishments to neighbors, co-workers, and extended family, while barely acknowledging Miguel's existence. Sarah felt the unfairness of this dynamic, but also the security of being the favored child, the one who brought joy instead of disappointment. Sarah's junior year brought medical school application season. The process was expensive, time-consuming, and stressful, requiring MCAT preparation, application fees, interview travel, and careful attention to every detail. Carmen involved herself in the process as if she were applying personally, researching programs, helping with essays, and tracking application deadlines. The financial burden of medical school applications stretched the family's resources. David worked overtime consistently, Carmen took a second job as an evening cleaner at a local office building, and Sarah applied for every scholarship and grant available. The sacrifice felt enormous, but also purposeful. They were investing in Sarah's future and, by extension, the family's long-term security. Sarah's acceptance to medical school felt like the culmination of years of planning and effort. Carmen cried with joy when the acceptance letter arrived, calling extended family to share the news and beginning immediately to plan for Sarah's graduation 4 years in the future. David's pride was quieter but equally deep. His daughter would become a doctor, something he could barely have imagined when he'd arrived in America as a young construction worker. Medical school intensified all the existing patterns. The workload was crushing, the competition fierce, and the financial pressure enormous. Sarah took out substantial loans to cover tuition and living expenses, understanding that she was accumulating debt that would take years to repay, but trusting that her future earning potential would justify the investment. Carmen's involvement in Sarah's life increased rather than decreased during medical school. She called daily for updates, sent care packages with home-cooked food, and planned visits that disrupted Sarah's study schedule but provided emotional connection to family. Carmen had begun introducing herself to strangers as the mother of a medical student, wearing Sarah's achievement like a badge of honor. The pressure to succeed felt overwhelming at times. Sarah's grades were good but not exceptional, placing her in the middle of her competitive class rather than at the top where Carmen expected her to be. Each exam felt like a test not just of Sarah's knowledge, but of her worthiness to carry the family's dreams and justify their sacrifice. During her second year of medical school, Sarah began experiencing panic attacks.
The symptoms, racing heart, difficulty breathing, sense of impending doom, interfered with her studying and left her exhausted. She sought help from the Student Health Center, where a counselor suggested that perfectionism and family pressure might be contributing to her anxiety. The idea that her family's support might be harmful felt both revolutionary and terrifying. Sarah had never questioned the assumption that Carmen's involvement and expectations were expressions of love and investment in her future. The possibility that these dynamics might be unhealthy challenged everything she understood about her relationships and identity. Sarah began therapy while maintaining her demanding academic schedule. The process of examining her family relationships, her perfectionism, and her anxiety revealed patterns she'd never recognized. The counselor helped her understand that love didn't require perfect performance, that healthy relationships included space for failure and growth, and that her worth wasn't determined by her ability to fulfill other people's dreams. The insights from therapy created distance between Sarah and Carmen that hadn't existed before. Carmen's daily calls felt intrusive rather than supportive. Her detailed questions about grades and performance felt like surveillance rather than interest. Her plans for Sarah's future felt controlling rather than collaborative. Sarah began setting small boundaries, limiting phone calls to twice weekly, sharing less detailed information about her academic performance, and making some decisions without Carmen's input or approval. Carmen's response was immediate and distressed. She accused Sarah of pulling away, becoming secretive, and losing appreciation for family sacrifice. The guilt Sarah felt about these boundaries was intense. Carmen's hurt seemed genuine, her confusion about Sarah's changing behavior appeared real, and her references to the family's financial sacrifice felt like legitimate grounds for continued involvement in Sarah's life. Sarah found herself alternating between maintaining boundaries and backing down when Carmen's emotional reactions became too difficult to tolerate. Sarah's residency match process became another battlefield. Carmen had strong opinions about which specialties were most prestigious and which geographic locations would be best for the family's long-term interests. Sarah felt torn between choosing based on her own professional interests and maintaining harmony with Carmen's expectations. When Sarah matched into pediatric surgery at a program in Denver, Carmen's reaction was mixed. She was proud of the competitive specialty, but disappointed about the distance from Phoenix. The 5-year residency would keep Sarah away from home during what Carmen described as crucial family years, and the demanding schedule would limit visits and phone contact. Residency was brutal in ways that college and medical school hadn't prepared Sarah for. The workload was crushing, the competition fierce, and the financial pressure enormous. Sarah took out substantial loans to cover tuition and living expenses, understanding that she was accumulating debt that would take years to repay, but trusting that her future earning potential would justify the investment. Carmen's involvement in Sarah's life increased rather than decreased during medical school. She called daily for updates, sent care packages with home-cooked food, and planned visits that disrupted Sarah's study schedule but provided emotional connection to family. Carmen had begun introducing herself to strangers as the mother of a medical student, wearing Sarah's achievement like a badge of honor. The pressure to succeed felt overwhelming at times. Sarah's grades were good but not exceptional, placing her in the middle of her competitive class rather than at the top where Carmen expected her to be. Each exam felt like a test not just of Sarah's knowledge, but of her worthiness to carry the family's dreams and justify their sacrifice. During her second year of medical school, Sarah began experiencing panic attacks. The symptoms, racing heart, difficulty breathing, sense of impending doom, interfered with her studying and left her exhausted. She sought help from the Student Health Center, where a counselor suggested that perfectionism and family pressure might be contributing to her anxiety. The idea that her family's support might be harmful felt both revolutionary and terrifying. Sarah had never questioned the assumption that Carmen's involvement and expectations were expressions of love and investment in her future. The possibility that these dynamics might be unhealthy challenged everything she understood about her relationships and identity. Sarah began therapy while maintaining her demanding academic schedule. The process of examining her family relationships, her perfectionism, and her anxiety revealed patterns she'd never recognized. The counselor helped her understand that love didn't require perfect performance, that healthy relationships included space for failure and growth, and that her worth wasn't determined by her ability to fulfill other people's dreams. The insights from therapy created distance between Sarah and Carmen that hadn't existed before. Carmen's daily calls felt intrusive rather than supportive. Her detailed questions about grades and performance felt like surveillance rather than interest. Her plans for Sarah's future felt controlling rather than collaborative. Sarah began setting small boundaries, limiting phone calls to twice weekly, sharing less detailed information about her academic performance, and making some decisions without Carmen's input or approval. Carmen's response was immediate and distressed. She accused Sarah of pulling away, becoming secretive, and losing appreciation for family sacrifice. The guilt Sarah felt about these boundaries was intense. Carmen's hurt seemed genuine, her confusion about Sarah's changing behavior appeared real, and her references to the family's financial sacrifice felt like legitimate grounds for continued involvement in Sarah's life. Sarah found herself alternating between boundaries.
The hours were crushing, the responsibility enormous, and the learning curve steep. Sarah worked 80-hour weeks regularly, slept in hospital call rooms more often than her own apartment, and found herself too exhausted for the daily phone calls Carmen expected. Carmen's response to Sarah's reduced availability was persistent disappointment and passive-aggressive comments about priorities and family loyalty. She seemed unable to understand that Sarah's schedule wasn't chosen but mandated, that her exhaustion wasn't laziness but the natural result of extreme demands, and that her reduced contact wasn't rejection but survival. The distance began to feel protective rather than problematic. Sarah discovered that she functioned better professionally when she wasn't constantly managing Carmen's emotions and expectations. Her performance during residency improved when she focused solely on medical training, rather than dividing her attention between patient care and family dynamics. Sarah began dating another resident, Michael Chen, during her third year of training. Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared understanding of medical training demands and mutual support through the challenges of residency. Michael was kind, intelligent, and respectful of Sarah's boundaries, qualities she realized she'd never experienced in relationships before. Carmen's reaction to Sarah's relationship was complex. She was pleased that Sarah was dating someone with similar educational and professional status, but anxious about losing influence over Sarah's life decisions. Carmen made pointed comments about the importance of cultural compatibility and maintaining family connections even after marriage. When Sarah and Michael became engaged during their fourth year of residency, Carmen immediately began planning a wedding that reflected her vision of appropriate celebration and family status. The conversation about budget, guest list, and ceremony details became contentious when Sarah expressed preferences that differed from Carmen's expectations. The wedding planning process revealed fundamental differences in values and priorities that Sarah had never acknowledged before. Carmen wanted a large, expensive celebration that would demonstrate the family's success and Sarah's achievement. Sarah preferred a smaller, more intimate ceremony that reflected her and Michael's personalities rather than serving as a status symbol. Carmen interpreted Sarah's preferences as rejection of family and culture. She spoke about feeling embarrassed by a small wedding, worried about what extended family would think, and hurt by Sarah's apparent lack of pride in her background. The emotional manipulation that had been effective throughout Sarah's childhood continued to work, creating guilt and self-doubt about her own desires. Sarah found herself agreeing to a larger, more expensive wedding than she wanted to avoid Carmen's distress. She justified the compromise as a way of honoring her parents' sacrifice and maintaining family harmony. Michael supported Sarah's decision while privately expressing concern about the family dynamics he was observing. The wedding was beautiful and well-attended, fulfilling Carmen's vision of celebration and status. Sarah felt proud and happy, but also strangely disconnected from the event, as if she were playing a role in someone else's story rather than celebrating her own life milestone. Carmen glowed with pride throughout the celebration, introducing guests to "my daughter, Dr. Martinez," and basking in the validation of years of planning and sacrifice. Following the wedding, Sarah and Michael moved to Denver, where Sarah began her fellowship in pediatric cardiac surgery and Michael started his career as an emergency physician. The geographic distance from Phoenix created natural boundaries that felt both liberating and guilt-inducing. Carmen's expectations for contact and involvement didn't adjust to accommodate Sarah's new life circumstances. She continued to expect daily phone calls, detailed updates on Sarah's professional progress, and significant input into major life decisions. When Sarah began to limit contact due to her demanding fellowship schedule, Carmen's response was predictably distressed.
The pattern that would ultimately lead to their complete estrangement was established during these early years of Sarah's marriage and career advancement. Carmen expected continued priority and influence, while Sarah was learning to build a life based on her own values and preferences. The clash between these incompatible visions would eventually reach a breaking point that neither woman could have anticipated. Sarah's success in her fellowship program brought opportunities for advanced training and research positions that would establish her as a leader in pediatric cardiac surgery. These opportunities required additional years of training, research responsibilities, and even more demanding schedules. Carmen viewed these achievements with mixed emotions, pride in Sarah's recognition, but resentment about the continued distance and reduced availability they represented. When Sarah published her first research paper in a prestigious medical journal, Carmen's response focused more on when Sarah might finally settle down closer to family rather than celebrating the professional milestone. The consistent message was that Sarah's achievements were valuable primarily for what they represented about family success rather than for their intrinsic worth or Sarah's personal satisfaction. Michael began to express concern about Carmen's continued involvement in their life decisions and the emotional toll that managing her expectations placed on Sarah. He encouraged Sarah to consider that healthy family relationships required mutual respect and support rather than one-sided accommodation of unreasonable demands. Sarah's increasing awareness of unhealthy family patterns coincided with her growing confidence as a surgeon and medical professional. She was saving children's lives, conducting groundbreaking research, and earning recognition from colleagues who valued her expertise and dedication. This external validation helped her recognize that her worth wasn't dependent on Carmen's approval or satisfaction. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been building for years. Sarah's growing independence and professional confidence would eventually collide with Carmen's unchanging expectations and control needs, creating a crisis that would force both women to confront the true nature of their relationship and decide what kind of future, if any, they could build together. The first sign that something fundamental had shifted came during Sarah's 5th year of residency, when she and Michael decided to buy a house in Denver. They had been renting a small apartment near the hospital, saving money while working impossible hours, but Sarah's upcoming fellowship position and Michael's permanent job offer made home ownership feel like a natural next step. Sarah called her parents to share the news, expecting the usual mixture of pride and concern that accompanied her major life decisions. Instead, Carmen's response was immediately hostile. A house? Without discussing it with family first? Carmen's voice carried the sharp edge that Sarah recognized from childhood, the tone that meant disappointment and impending conflict. "We've been looking, Mom. I mentioned we were house hunting," Sarah replied, already feeling the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "Mentioning and consulting are completely different things," Carmen shot back. "This is a huge financial decision. What about when you have children? What about being closer to family? You're making choices like you have no obligations to anyone but yourselves." The conversation deteriorated quickly. Carmen accused Sarah of becoming selfish and forgetting her family's sacrifices. She questioned Michael's influence on Sarah's decisions, suggesting that he was pulling her away from her roots and responsibilities. She reminded Sarah of the money spent on her education, the years of support, the dreams that had been built around Sarah's success. Sarah found herself defending choices that felt entirely reasonable and appropriate for her life circumstances. She was 29 years old, a successful physician with her own income and career, yet she felt like a teenager being scolded for failing to ask permission for basic life decisions.
The house purchase became a symbol of larger issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Carmen viewed Sarah's increasing independence as rejection and ingratitude. Sarah experienced Carmen's continued attempts at control as suffocating and inappropriate. The gulf between their perspectives seemed unbridgeable. Michael witnessed several of these phone conversations and began expressing concern about the emotional toll they took on Sarah. He watched her transformation from confident, accomplished surgeon to anxious, guilt-ridden daughter whenever Carmen called. The pattern was predictable and destructive, leaving Sarah drained and questioning decisions that had nothing to do with her parents. "You don't owe your mother control over your adult life," Michael said after a particularly difficult conversation about their mortgage terms. "Supporting family doesn't mean sacrificing your autonomy."
The observation felt both obvious and revolutionary. Sarah had never separated support from control in her understanding of family relationships. Carmen's involvement had always been presented as care and investment rather than manipulation and boundary violation. Recognizing the difference required acknowledging that much of what she'd experienced as love might actually have been conditional acceptance based on compliance. Sarah began therapy again, this time with a counselor who specialized in family systems and boundary setting. Dr. Rebecca Walsh helped Sarah identify the patterns that had governed her relationship since childhood and understand how these dynamics continue to impact her adult life and marriage. Healthy families want their adult children to succeed independently, Dr. Walsh explained during one session. They celebrate autonomy rather than viewing it as threat or abandonment. Your mother's reactions suggest she may have difficulty allowing you to fully separate and individuate. The therapy sessions provided language for experiences Sarah had never been able to articulate. Enmeshment, emotional manipulation, conditional love, parentification, terms that described her childhood and current family dynamics with uncomfortable accuracy. Understanding the concepts intellectually was one thing, accepting their application to her own life was far more challenging. Sarah began setting firmer boundaries with Carmen. She limited phone calls to once per week, stopped sharing detailed information about financial decisions, and politely deflected attempts to involve Carmen in choices that belonged to Sarah and Michael. Carmen's response was immediate and intense. The guilt trips increased in frequency and severity. Carmen spoke about feeling abandoned, rejected, and unappreciated. She reminded Sarah constantly of the family's sacrifices and investments. She compared Sarah unfavorably to friends' daughters who remained close to their families and made their mothers feel valued and included. "I gave up everything for your success," became Carmen's refrain during their increasingly strained conversations. "I worked 2 jobs to pay for your education. I supported your dreams when no one else believed in you. Now you act like family doesn't matter?" The emotional manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Carmen never made direct demands or issued ultimatums. Instead, she created an atmosphere of hurt and disappointment that made Sarah feel guilty for maintaining reasonable boundaries. The message was clear. Sarah's independence was hurting the person who had sacrificed most for her success. David's role in these conflicts remained largely passive. He supported Carmen's position when pressed, but seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of the disputes. During rare conversations when Carmen wasn't present, David would express pride in Sarah's accomplishments and understanding about her need to focus on her career and marriage. "Your mother just misses you," he would explain apologetically. "She put so much into your success that she doesn't know how to step back now that you're grown." The explanation felt insufficient to account for Carmen's behavior, but David's perspective offered glimpse into family dynamics that Sarah was only beginning to understand. Carmen's identity had become so intertwined with Sarah's achievements that any step toward independence felt like personal rejection rather than natural development. Miguel remained largely absent from family drama, having established distance years earlier through different means. When Sarah occasionally spoke with her brother, he was supportive but unsurprised by her struggles with Carmen's controlling behavior. "I tried to tell you years ago that Mom's support came with strings," Miguel said during one rare phone conversation. "You were just better at meeting her expectations than I was, so the strings felt like love instead of control." Miguel's observation stung because it contained uncomfortable truth. Sarah had benefited from Carmen's favoritism for so long that she'd never questioned whether the relationship was healthy or sustainable. Only now that she was trying to establish adult independence was she experiencing the same controlling behavior that had driven Miguel away years earlier. The tension reached a crisis point during the Christmas holidays of Sarah's final year of residency. Sarah and Michael had planned to spend Christmas morning at their own home, then drive to Phoenix for a few days with Sarah's family. The compromise seemed reasonable. They would maintain their own holiday traditions while still prioritizing family time. Carmen's reaction to this plan was explosive. She accused Sarah of choosing Michael's family over her own, despite the fact that Michael's parents lived in California and weren't part of their Christmas plans. She interpreted Sarah's desire to spend Christmas morning in her own home as rejection of family values and traditions. "You're acting like you're too good for the family that raised you," Carmen said during a heated phone conversation. "Christmas is supposed to be about family, not about your selfish desires to play house with your husband." The conversation escalated quickly. Carmen brought up every past grievance, every boundary Sarah had established, every sign of independence that Carmen had interpreted as rejection. She accused Sarah of ingratitude, selfishness, and betrayal of family loyalty. She questioned Michael's influence and suggested that Sarah had become someone unrecognizable since marriage. Sarah found herself defending not just her Christmas plans, but her entire adult life. The conversation touched on her career choices, her living situation, her financial decisions, her relationship priorities, and her commitment to family. Carmen seemed determined to relitigate every aspect of Sarah's independence, as if winning this argument would restore her previous level of control. "I'm tired of fighting about every decision I make," finally said, her voice shaking with frustration and exhaustion.
I'm almost 30 years old. I'm a physician. I'm married. I should be able to spend Christmas morning in my own home without it being a family crisis. Carmen's response was swift and devastating. If that's how you feel, then maybe you shouldn't bother coming home at all. Maybe you should just stay in Denver with your new life and forget about the people who sacrificed everything for you. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that Carmen was presenting a false choice: complete compliance with her expectations or total rejection from the family. There was no middle ground being offered, no room for negotiation or compromise. "I don't want to choose between my marriage and my family," Sarah said quietly. "But if you're forcing me to choose, then I choose my marriage and my own life." The silence that followed was deafening. When Carmen finally spoke, her voice was cold and final. "Then you've made your choice. Don't expect to be welcomed back when you realize what you've thrown away." The call ended with both women hanging up simultaneously. Sarah sat in her kitchen, staring at the phone, unable to fully process what had just happened. In the space of 30 minutes, her relationship with her mother had gone from strained to seemingly irreparable. Michael found her there an hour later, still sitting in the same position, tears streaming down her face. When he asked what had happened, Sarah could barely articulate the conversation. The reality that her mother had essentially disowned her over Christmas plans felt too surreal to be real. "She said I chose Michael over family. She said not to expect to be welcomed back. I think she just cut me off." Michael held her while she cried, offering comfort and perspective. He reminded her that healthy families don't issue ultimatums over reasonable boundaries. He pointed out that Carmen's reaction was far out of proportion to the supposed offense. He suggested that this crisis might actually create opportunity for healthier relationship dynamics in the future. But Sarah wasn't ready to hear optimistic interpretations. She felt the devastating loss of the relationship that had defined her identity for nearly 30 years. Regardless of its dysfunction, Carmen's approval had been central to Sarah's sense of self and security. The prospect of moving forward without that connection felt terrifying and lonely. David called 2 days later, his voice heavy with exhaustion and sadness. He had tried to mediate between Sarah and Carmen, but Carmen remained unmoved. She had declared Sarah dead to the family, a dramatic pronouncement that David clearly found excessive, but felt powerless to change. "She's hurt me, huh?" David said, using the childhood endearment that brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. "You know how your mother gets when she feels rejected. Maybe give her some time to cool down." But Sarah was beginning to understand that this wasn't about cooling down or temporary hurt feelings. This was about Carmen's inability to accept Sarah's autonomy and the breakdown of a relationship built on control rather than love. Time alone wouldn't fix fundamental incompatibilities in how they viewed adult family relationships. Sarah and Michael spent Christmas morning in their own home, as planned, but the joy Sarah had anticipated was overshadowed by grief and uncertainty. She found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for a message from Carmen that might indicate possibility for reconciliation. None came. The days following Christmas were surreal. Sarah had been accustomed to daily contact with Carmen, and the sudden silence felt disorienting. She caught herself reaching for the phone to share small news or ask questions, then remembering that communication had been severed. The absence of Carmen's voice in her life created unexpected emptiness. New Year's Eve brought reflection on the year's events and consideration of what lay ahead.
Sarah's fellowship would begin in 6 months, launching the next phase of her career in pediatric cardiac surgery. She and Michael were settling into their new house and building a life together. By most measures, her life was successful and fulfilling. Yet the estrangement from her family cast a shadow over these achievements. Sarah found herself questioning whether her success was worth the cost of family relationships. Carmen's accusations about selfishness and ingratitude echoed in her mind, creating doubt about decisions that had previously felt clear and appropriate. Dr. Walsh helped Sarah process the grief and guilt surrounding the estrangement during their therapy sessions. She normalized the pain of family rejection while helping Sarah understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect and flexibility. Carmen's all-or-nothing approach left no room for the natural evolution that occurs as adult children establish independence. Grief is appropriate, Dr. Walsh explained. You're mourning the loss of the relationship you hoped to have with your mother, and the realization that the relationship you did have was conditional on your compliance. Both losses deserve acknowledgement and processing. The therapy sessions provided framework for understanding Sarah's emotions while reinforcing that maintaining boundaries didn't make her selfish or ungrateful. The guilt she felt was result of years of conditioning rather than accurate assessment of her behavior. Learning to trust her own judgment after years of deferring to Carmen's expectations was challenging but necessary work. Sarah's fellowship began in July, bringing new challenges and opportunities that demanded her full attention and energy.
The work was demanding but fulfilling. She was operating on children with complex heart defects, contributing to research that would improve outcomes for future patients, and building expertise that would define her career. The distance from family drama allowed Sarah to rediscover aspects of herself that had been suppressed under Carmen's expectations. She developed friendships with colleagues based on shared interests rather than family approval. She pursued hobbies and activities that brought personal satisfaction rather than external validation. She learned to make decisions based on her own values and preferences rather than anticipating others' reactions. 6 months into the estrangement, Sarah received a call from Miguel. He had heard about the conflict through family channels and wanted to offer support and perspective. The conversation was the longest they'd had in years, covering not just current events, but their shared experiences growing up under Carmen's controlling parenting. "I'm proud of you for standing up to her," Miguel said toward the end of their conversation. "I know it's hard, but you deserve to have your own life. Mom never learned to let go, and that's her problem, not yours." Miguel's support meant more to Sarah than she had expected. Having her brother's validation helped counter some of the guilt and self-doubt that Carmen's rejection had created. She realized that family didn't have to be all or nothing. She could maintain relationship with Miguel and potentially David while accepting that reconciliation with Carmen might not be possible. The 1-year anniversary of the estrangement passed without acknowledgement from Carmen. Sarah had hoped that time might soften her mother's position, but the continued silence suggested that Carmen viewed the separation as permanent. The finality was painful, but also clarifying. Sarah could stop hoping for reconciliation and focus on building the life she wanted. During this period of reflection and adjustment, Sarah began considering practical implications of the estrangement. What would happen if David became ill and needed care? How would holidays and family gatherings work? What about potential future children who would never know their grandmother? Most pressingly, what would happen to family assets and inheritance if Carmen considered Sarah dead to the family? The financial questions led Sarah to examine her own estate planning, which had been minimal during her years of training and early career. She and Michael had basic wills that left everything to each other, but they hadn't considered more complex scenarios or long-term planning. Given Carmen's dramatic rejection, Sarah wondered whether she should be more intentional about her own legacy and beneficiaries. Sarah scheduled a consultation with an estate planning attorney to discuss her options and ensure her affairs were organized according to her own values rather than default family assumptions. The conversation with attorney Rebecca Martinez, no relation, despite sharing a surname, opened Sarah's eyes to the power of legal documentation to reflect personal values and relationships. Estate planning isn't just about money, Rebecca explained. It's about ensuring that your legacy reflects your priorities and that people who matter to you are provided for according to your wishes rather than legal defaults.
Sarah learned that without specific documentation, her biological family would have legal standing in various scenarios, even if they were estranged. More importantly, she realized that her will could be a tool for expressing her values and supporting people and causes that had been meaningful in her life, rather than defaulting to biological relationships. The idea began forming that would eventually define Sarah's response to Carmen's rejection. If her mother considered her dead to the family, then Sarah would make that official through legal documentation. But rather than simply cutting off biological family, she would use her will to create a positive legacy that reflected her actual relationships and values. Sarah began researching charitable organizations that aligned with her professional and personal commitments. She learned about foundations that supported medical education for underprivileged students, organizations that provided healthcare services in underserved communities, and programs that helped children from dysfunctional families access mental health services. The research process helped Sarah envision how she could transform Carmen's rejection into opportunity for positive impact. Instead of leaving assets to biological family who had demonstrated conditional love and controlling behavior, she could support people and causes that represented her genuine values and priorities. Sarah also began considering the people in her life who had provided unconditional support and authentic relationship. Michael, obviously, but also mentors from medical school and residency who had invested in her development without expecting anything in return. Colleagues who had become genuine friends. Dr. Walsh, whose therapeutic support had been crucial during the most difficult period of her life. The concept of chosen family began taking concrete form as Sarah considered how to structure her estate planning. These were people who had supported her growth and autonomy rather than demanding compliance and control. They had celebrated her successes without claiming ownership of her achievements. They had offered care without strings attached. As Sarah's fellowship progressed and her expertise in pediatric cardiac surgery grew, she began receiving recognition that would have previously prompted calls from Carmen seeking reflected glory. Awards, speaking invitations, research publications, achievements that Carmen would have claimed as validation of her sacrifices and investment. Instead, Sarah experienced these successes as purely her own, earned through her effort and talent rather than family expectation. The absence of Carmen's commentary and claimed ownership actually enhanced Sarah's enjoyment of professional recognition. She discovered that achievements felt more satisfying when they belonged entirely to her, rather than being shared with someone who viewed them as vindication of their parenting choices. Michael watched Sarah's transformation with admiration and concern. He celebrated her growing confidence and independence while worrying about the pain that family estrangement continued to cause. During quiet moments, Sarah would express sadness about missing family milestones and uncertainty about whether she had made the right choices. "You chose authentic over comfort," Michael would remind her. "That's never easy, but it's usually right." The second anniversary of the estrangement approached with no indication that Carmen's position had softened. Sarah had established a fulfilling life without her mother's involvement, but she still carried grief about the relationship's end and uncertainty about whether reconciliation might someday be possible. During this reflective period, Sarah received unexpected contact from David. He called late one evening, his voice heavy with emotion and alcohol. Carmen had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer, he explained, and was scheduled for surgery the following month. Despite their estrangement, he felt Sarah should know about her mother's health situation. The news created complex emotions for Sarah. She felt genuinely concerned for Carmen's well-being and fear about potentially losing her mother permanently. But she also recognized that this health crisis might be presented as opportunity for reconciliation on Carmen's terms, rather than genuine resolution of their relationship issues. Sarah offered to help with medical questions or treatment decisions, demonstrating that her professional expertise was available regardless of their personal conflicts. David appreciated the offer, but indicated that Carmen had refused any involvement from Sarah, preferring to handle her medical care without contact from her estranged daughter.
Carmen's refusal of Sarah's professional help, even during health crisis, confirmed that the estrangement was truly about control rather than love. A mother who genuinely cared about her daughter's well-being would accept medical expertise regardless of personal conflicts. Carmen's continued rejection suggested that she preferred martyrdom to reconciliation. The cancer diagnosis and Carmen's refusal of help crystallized Sarah's understanding of their relationship's true nature. This wasn't temporary estrangement that would resolve with time and goodwill. This was fundamental incompatibility between someone who demanded control and someone who required autonomy. Carmen had chosen pride and control over relationship with her daughter, even when facing serious illness. Sarah's estate planning took on new urgency as she confronted the possibility that Carmen might die without their relationship being resolved. Rather than rushing toward reconciliation that would require abandoning her boundaries, Sarah decided to finalize legal documentation that reflected her actual values and relationships rather than biological connections that had proven conditional and harmful. The decision felt both sad and empowering. Sarah was accepting the loss of the mother-daughter relationship she had always wanted while taking control of her own legacy and impact. If Carmen considered her dead to the family, then Sarah would make that official while ensuring that her life and resources would benefit people and causes that aligned with her authentic self rather than her family's expectations. The transformation was nearly complete. The perfect daughter who had spent 30 years seeking approval and avoiding conflict had become a confident woman who prioritized truth and authenticity over comfort and compliance. The final step would be making her choice official through legal documentation that would stand as permanent testament to her values and priorities. Sarah sat in attorney Rebecca Martinez's office on a crisp October morning, a manila folder containing her revised estate planning documents spread across the polished conference table. 3 years had passed since Carmen's dramatic declaration, and Sarah had used that time to build a life that reflected her authentic values rather than inherited obligations. The attorney reviewed the final draft of Sarah's comprehensive will, trust documents, and healthcare directives with professional thoroughness. Every clause had been carefully crafted to reflect Sarah's priorities and relationships, creating a legal framework that would honor her choices regardless of biological family dynamics. "This is quite comprehensive," Rebecca noted, flipping through the pages. "You've covered every scenario I can think of. Your charitable bequests are substantial and well-structured. The trust provisions for your chosen beneficiaries are thoughtful and practical." Sarah nodded, feeling a profound sense of completion. The documents represented more than legal planning. They were tangible proof of her transformation from someone who lived according to others' expectations to someone who made choices based on personal values and authentic relationships. The will designated Michael as primary beneficiary, as expected, but the remainder of Sarah's estate would be distributed among people and organizations that had provided genuine support and alignment with her principles. Dr. Walsh, her therapist, would receive a significant bequest in recognition of the life-changing guidance she had provided during Sarah's most difficult period. Sarah's surgical mentor, Dr. Patricia Hendricks, would receive funding to continue her research into pediatric cardiac surgery techniques that had saved hundreds of children's lives. The charitable components were extensive and meaningful. Sarah had established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students pursuing medical careers, specifically targeting those from dysfunctional family backgrounds who might lack traditional support systems. Another bequest would fund a clinic providing free mental health services to children and adolescents in underserved communities. Most significantly, Sarah had created a foundation focused on supporting young adults who were estranged from family due to abuse or controlling behavior. The foundation would provide resources for therapy, legal assistance, and practical support for people rebuilding their lives after choosing autonomy over toxic family dynamics. "The foundation structure is particularly impressive," Rebecca commented. "You've created something that will help people in similar situations long after you're gone. That's quite a legacy." Sarah smiled at the observation. Legacy had taken on new meaning during her journey toward independence. Rather than being remembered as someone who fulfilled family expectations or maintained artificial harmony, she would be known for supporting people who chose authenticity over compliance, health over dysfunction, and truth over comfortable illusions. The most pointed aspect of Sarah's will was what it didn't include. Carmen, David, and even Miguel were entirely absent from the documents. Sarah had wrestled with the decision regarding her father and brother, both of whom had maintained some level of relationship with her despite Carmen's ultimatum. Ultimately, she decided that including anyone who remained aligned with Carmen's version of family loyalty would undermine the document's integrity and message. The will included a comprehensive statement explaining Sarah's choices, written in clear language that would leave no doubt about her reasoning or intentions. The statement detailed the pattern of conditional love, emotional manipulation, and controlling behavior that had characterized her relationship with Carmen. It explained that genuine family relationships were based on mutual respect, support for individual growth, and unconditional love rather than performance-based acceptance.
Sarah specifically addressed Carmen's declaration that she was dead to the family, stating that she was making this pronouncement official through legal documentation while transforming it from rejection into opportunity for positive impact. If Carmen preferred to consider Sarah dead rather than accept her autonomy, then Sarah would honor that choice, while ensuring her actual death would benefit people who understood the difference between love and control. The statement concluded with Sarah's hope that her example might encourage other people to prioritize their well-being over family expectations when those expectations became harmful or destructive. She acknowledged the pain of family estrangement while affirming that some relationships were too toxic to maintain, regardless of biological connections. Rebecca finished reviewing the documents and looked up at Sarah with professional admiration. "These are some of the most thoughtful and comprehensive estate planning documents I've ever prepared. You've clearly put tremendous consideration into every aspect of your legacy and values." Sarah felt deep satisfaction at the attorney's assessment. The documents represented 3 years of growth, reflection, and careful consideration of what truly mattered in her life. They were proof that she had successfully separated from family dynamics that had been limiting her potential and authentic self-expression. "There's one more document I'd like to add," Sarah said, pulling a sealed envelope from her briefcase. "This is a letter to be delivered to my mother only in the event of my death. I want her to understand exactly what her choices cost and why I made mine." Rebecca accepted the envelope and made notes about its handling. "Is there anything else you'd like to address while we're finalizing everything?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The legal documents covered all the practical aspects of her wishes, but she realized there was one more step that would complete her transformation from dutiful daughter to autonomous adult. "I want to change my emergency contacts," Sarah said. "Remove my parents and add my mentor, Dr. Hendricks."
Hendricks and my colleague, Dr. James Park. If something happens to me, I want people who respect my choices to be making decisions about my care. The detail seemed small but represented a fundamental shift in how Sarah approached life and death decisions. Even in unconsciousness or incapacity, she wanted to be surrounded by people who honored her autonomy rather than those who would use medical crisis as opportunity to reassert control. Rebecca made the necessary notes and assured Sarah that all documents would be properly executed and filed. The legal framework was complete, but Sarah's personal journey was still evolving in unexpected ways. Sarah's professional life had flourished during the years of family estrangement. She had been promoted to attending surgeon at Denver Children's Hospital and had earned national recognition for her research into innovative surgical techniques for complex congenital heart defects. Her work was saving lives and advancing medical knowledge in ways that brought profound personal satisfaction. The success felt different from childhood and young adult achievements that had been filtered through Carmen's pride and ownership. These accomplishments belonged entirely to Sarah, earned through her skill and dedication rather than family investment or sacrifice. The absence of external validation needs had actually enhanced her professional effectiveness and innovation. Sarah's marriage to Michael had deepened and strengthened during the period of family estrangement. Without the constant pressure of managing Carmen's expectations and reactions, Sarah had been able to invest fully in building a partnership based on mutual respect and support. They had learned to navigate challenges together rather than triangulating through family drama. Michael had been unwavering in his support of Sarah's decision to formalize her estrangement through estate planning. He understood that the legal documents represented healing and empowerment rather than vindictiveness or spite. Sarah's will reflected her values and priorities rather than biological obligations that had proven conditional and harmful. The couple had also made the decision to remain childless, a choice that would have devastated Carmen but brought Sarah and Michael peace and freedom. They were able to focus on their careers, their relationship, and their contributions to society without the complications that children might bring to their already complex family dynamics. Sarah's relationship with Miguel had evolved into cordial but distant contact. He respected her choices and occasionally reached out with updates about his life, but he remained connected to David and reluctant to fully separate from family dynamics that Sarah had left behind. Their relationship was friendly but limited by his continued ties to the family system Sarah had rejected. David's position remained complicated and painful for Sarah. He had never fully supported Carmen's ultimatum, but had also never challenged it directly. His passivity during the family crisis had been disappointing, but not entirely surprising given his lifelong pattern of avoiding conflict with Carmen.
Sarah felt sadness about losing connection with her father, but understood that his continued alignment with Carmen made genuine relationship impossible. The most unexpected development during Sarah's journey toward independence had been her growing involvement in advocacy for people experiencing family estrangement. She had begun speaking at conferences about the medical and psychological impacts of toxic family dynamics, drawing on both her professional expertise and personal experience. Sarah's presentations focused on helping healthcare providers recognize signs of family-based trauma and support patients who were navigating estrangement from abusive or controlling relatives. Her message was that biological family relationships weren't inherently healthy or worth preserving, and that chosen family could provide more authentic love and support than dysfunctional biological connections. The speaking engagements had connected Sarah with a community of people who shared similar experiences and values. She had found belonging and acceptance that had been missing from her biological family relationships. These connections felt authentic and sustainable in ways that performance-based family approval never had. Sarah's advocacy work had also attracted criticism from some quarters, particularly from people who viewed family loyalty as absolute, regardless of behavior or treatment. She had received angry emails and social media messages from people who accused her of promoting family breakdown and abandoning traditional values. The criticism had been initially disturbing, but ultimately clarifying. Sarah realized that people who prioritized family loyalty over individual well-being were often defending their own dysfunctional relationships rather than genuinely disagreeing with her message. Their reactions confirmed that her work was challenging necessary assumptions about family obligations and unconditional acceptance. Dr. Walsh had been instrumental in helping Sarah process the responses to her advocacy work and maintain perspective about the difference between helpful feedback and projection from people defending their own situations. The therapeutic relationship had evolved from crisis intervention to ongoing support for Sarah's continued growth and professional development. Sarah's success in both medicine and advocacy had brought opportunities she never could have imagined during her years of seeking Carmen's approval. She had been invited to serve on hospital boards, advisory committees for medical organizations, and nonprofit boards focused on family trauma and recovery. Each opportunity represented validation of Sarah's authentic self rather than her ability to meet external expectations. The difference was profound and liberating. She was being recognized for her genuine contributions and perspectives rather than her compliance with others' visions of success. The financial success that accompanied Sarah's professional achievements had made her estate planning even more meaningful. She had substantial assets to distribute according to her values rather than default family obligations. The money represented her own earnings and choices, rather than family investment or sacrifice, making her discretion over its distribution feel entirely appropriate. Sarah's charitable giving during her lifetime had also increased significantly. She was able to support causes and organizations that aligned with her values without requiring approval or understanding from family members who might have different priorities. The freedom to be generous according to her own moral compass felt empowering and authentic. As the third anniversary of Carmen's ultimatum approached, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had occurred during those years. The woman who had once sought constant approval and feared family disappointment had become someone who prioritized authenticity over harmony, growth over compliance, and chosen family over biological obligation. The change hadn't been without cost. Sarah still carried grief about the loss of relationship with her parents and sadness about family milestones she would miss. She wondered occasionally whether she could have handled the conflicts differently or whether reconciliation might someday be possible. But the costs were outweighed by benefits that were undeniable and life-changing. Sarah had discovered her authentic self, built genuine relationships, contributed meaningfully to her profession and community, and created a legacy that reflected her actual values rather than inherited expectations. The legal documents sitting in Rebecca Martinez's office were tangible proof of Sarah's transformation. They represented not just practical planning, but philosophical statement about the difference between biological connection and genuine family. They would ensure that Sarah's legacy reflected her choices rather than others' claims on her life and achievements. Sarah received the final executed copies of her estate planning documents on a Friday afternoon in early November. She placed them in her home safe alongside other important papers, feeling profound completion. The legal framework was now in place to honor her values and relationships, regardless of what biological family might claim or expect. That evening, Sarah and Michael celebrated the completion of her estate planning with quiet dinner at their favorite restaurant. The milestone felt significant but private. This wasn't about making statements or proving points to others, but about ensuring alignment between Sarah's values and her legal documentation.
How do you feel about having everything finalized? Michael asked over dessert. Sarah considered the question carefully. I feel free, she said finally. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like everything about my life reflects my actual choices, rather than inherited obligations or other people's expectations. The freedom was both exhilarating and peaceful. Sarah no longer carried the anxiety of potential family conflicts or the guilt of failing to meet external expectations. Her life belonged to her, and her legacy would reflect her authentic priorities and relationships. Word of Carmen's cancer treatment had reached Sarah through family channels. The surgery had been successful, and Carmen was recovering well with good prognosis. Sarah felt genuine relief about her mother's health while maintaining clarity about their relationship boundaries. Carmen's recovery had not included any outreach to Sarah or acknowledgement that her previous ultimatum might have been excessive or unfair. The continued silence confirmed that Carmen preferred estrangement to admitting error or apologizing for harmful behavior. Sarah accepted this reality without bitterness or surprise. Sarah learned through Miguel that Carmen had been telling people Sarah had abandoned the family during her mother's cancer treatment, omitting the context that Carmen had refused Sarah's offers of medical consultation and maintained the estrangement Carmen herself had initiated. The distortion was painful but predictable. Carmen preferred victimhood to accountability. The holiday season arrived with its usual emotional complexities. Sarah and Michael had established their own traditions that brought joy without triggering grief about family estrangement. They volunteered at the Children's Hospital during Christmas, providing continuity of care for young patients whose families were spending holidays in unfamiliar medical settings. Sarah's work with hospitalized children during holidays reinforced her understanding of genuine family bonds. She observed parents who demonstrated unconditional love, support, and advocacy for their children regardless of circumstances. She also witnessed dysfunctional family dynamics that created additional stress for children already facing medical challenges. The contrast clarified Sarah's perspective on her own family experience. Carmen's love had always been conditional on Sarah's performance and compliance, while these parents loved their children simply for existing. Sarah had never experienced that type of unconditional acceptance from her biological family, but she had found it in her chosen relationships with Michael, Dr. Walsh, and close friends. New Year's Eve brought reflection on the year's accomplishments and goals for the future. Sarah had achieved professional recognition, personal growth, and legal documentation that reflected her authentic values. She had built a life that brought satisfaction and meaning without requiring external approval or validation. Looking ahead, Sarah planned to expand her advocacy work and continue developing her surgical expertise. She wanted to use her platform and resources to help more people navigate family estrangement with dignity and support. The foundation established through her will would continue this work beyond her lifetime. Sarah also hoped to continue deepening her marriage and friendships, relationships that had flourished when freed from the complications of managing dysfunctional family dynamics. She looked forward to continued professional growth and opportunities to mentor young physicians who might be struggling with similar family pressures. The legal documents in Sarah's safe represented more than practical planning. They were testament to transformation from dutiful daughter to autonomous adult. They proved that people could choose authenticity over comfort, growth over stagnation, and chosen family over biological obligation when necessary for well-being and integrity. Sarah's story wasn't unique, but her response had been unusually decisive and comprehensive. Rather than maintaining uncomfortable status quo or accepting partial estrangement, she had committed fully to building life according to her own values and priorities. The will served as permanent record of those choices and their consequences. As Sarah settled into bed on New Year's Eve, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought her to this point of clarity and authenticity. The path had been painful at times, but the destination was everything she could have hoped for: a life that belonged entirely to her, relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care, and a legacy that would reflect her actual values rather than inherited expectations.
The last 3 years had taught Sarah that family wasn't defined by biology, but love, respect, and mutual support. She had found genuine family among friends, colleagues, and mentors who celebrated her growth rather than demanding compliance with their expectations. Carmen's rejection had been devastating initially, but ultimately liberating, creating space for relationships that were healthier and more authentic. Sarah's will would ensure that her legacy reflect these truths. When Carmen had declared her dead to the family, Sarah had eventually accepted that pronouncement while transforming it from punishment into opportunity. Her legal documentation made official what Carmen had chosen while directing Sarah's resources toward people and causes that understood the difference between love and control. The certified letter from the attorney's office had been the final piece of Sarah's transformation puzzle. With comprehensive estate planning in place, Sarah was free to live according to her own values without concern for family claims on her achievements or legacy. She had successfully separated from toxic family dynamics while building meaningful alternative connections. Sarah's example demonstrated that people could choose authenticity over family harmony when those goals conflicted. Her will served as permanent testament to the power of choosing growth, truth, and genuine relationship over comfort, compliance, and biological obligation. She had made Carmen's dramatic rejection official while ensuring it would ultimately benefit people who understood healthy relationship dynamics. The transformation was complete. Sarah Martinez had evolved from perfect daughter seeking constant approval to authentic adult living according to her own values. Her will reflected that evolution, ensuring her legacy would honor her choices rather than family expectations that had proven conditional and harmful. Carmen's ultimatum had been accepted and formalized, but on Sarah's terms and for Sarah's purposes, rather than as punishment or rejection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.